Calling to order the meeting of the SHAPE Committee for Wednesday, February 28th. You can call roll.
Chair Smithers.
Here.
Vice Chair Shuto.
Here.
Committee Member Barr.
Here.
Caldwell.
Here.
Dell.
Here.
Feeney is absent. Knight.
Here.
Neiman.
Here.
Park. Absent. Sylvestrin.
Here.
Smith.
Here. Thank you. So we moved to item 3, which is public comments pertaining to SHAPE Committee. I don't know if anybody out there has anything they want to say to us or ask of us before we get started. You do? Make your way up to the podium. No? Okay. We'll close the public comment period and move on to consent items. 4.1, approval of the minutes from February 14th. If I could get a motion and a second from somebody.
I motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
No.
No, I asked that.
I'm sorry, I showed up late, so I was a little late to the game.
Oh, would you like to come up and address us before?
If this is public comments pertaining
Sure, go ahead.
to public property, yes. Hello, my name is Jason Kalparis. I am a longtime resident of St. Helena. I live at 1421 Stockton Street. And I am a little late to the game here, but I do think I represent a good portion of the St. Helena populace. And my concern is that there's been some push to potentially, since I know the city has some monetary needs to do a one-time sale of some of these public properties, and I think that would be a big mistake. Is that's one-time funds that we wouldn't be able to get back. I mean, it's real estate in St. Helena. It's location, location, and location. And I can speak to a lot of the properties. The library parcel itself is our last major green space. That parcel really needs to be developed as a hardscape landscape to where the farmers market and the center of our community should be. That's really, and there should be an amphitheater there. We should be looking at the majestic Mount St. Helena, and we should recenter our town there. I don't think it should be housing. I don't think that it would take a lot of money to correctly use that parcel. Second, I think that we need to potentially try to operate our properties differently. And one, again, not selling them, but maybe looking to how other nonprofit entities run their own properties. For example, I'm the treasurer of the St. Helena Oddfellows, and we have a 2-story building. So the downstairs of the building is run like a business. So we have commercial income that comes in. But the upstairs building is there to serve the members of the community and the members of the lodge. And we use that as a commercial gathering space, and we use that to gather as lodge members so that we can promote charity and help the general public. And I think that if we look at all of the parcels in St. Helena, that what we've done is that we're potentially crying for a lack of money. We've done no deferred maintenance on many of these buildings, and I'm going to speak to one of them specifically, and now we're wondering what we should do with all of this. I think it's going to take money to make money, and I think the Carnegie Building is a perfect example of something that we could be using to potentially make money. I think even City Hall is has the potential of being able to make money. It's located right next to Lyman Park. It's a single-story building, but if we invested in it and made it a 2-story building, maybe our office or our City Hall could be on the 2nd floor, and maybe commercial space could be on the lower floor. My bigger concern is, and again, I hope I'm not operating on hearsay, but potentially doing something different with Scout Hall. Scout Hall has a rich history, and we really, really need to protect that hall as a youth for not only Boy Scouts but Girl Scouts. I think it is underutilized. I think that that building could also be used more for the community. But again, that building has been very neglected. Probably needs a roof. It's got some substantial leaks in it. And until we start investing and dealing with the deferred maintenance of our properties are more of a risk than the asset that they have the potential to be. I really hope that as a community we can decide how we're going to hold on to all of these properties and use them for community benefits and not for potential hotels or a one-time sale. I think that would be a huge mistake, and we would have a lot of explaining to do to our next generations. Anyways, I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.
Hey, Jason, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Scout Hall,
Yeah.
because I know you're pretty deeply involved there. Do you have any thoughts on whether the scout groups would be willing to help with some of the investing in Scout Hall?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I can't speak on behalf of Scouts. I'm not here to represent Scouts, but I think that I think when we look at all of our properties, that there are segments of our population that could help the city, and I would hate to say that if it takes taxes to protect this, then I would be open to that. I think that I would probably lose a lot of friends over that. But the reality is, I think that there are lots of nonprofits out there. I think there's lots of money within our community that if we pull together as a town, we could not only, Scouts is a great example. Yes, I think the Scouts would want to participate in restoring and saving that building. I think the unknown for Scouts, and I think we could extend that to many of these buildings, is these unknown use. I think that if obviously if Scouts were going to be responsible or make an investment, they'd want to know that part of that building is theirs. And I'm not saying all of it. I'm not saying 7 days a week, but that is their home and that it's not going to be taken from them. Same thing with potentially, an example like the teen center. Like I mean, just all of our properties. If we're going to, there's been ideas of housing the Historic Society in the Carnegie building. We have to come together as a town, and we have to do this together. We don't want to sell these assets. You sell in St. Helena, and you get that one-time kick, but you don't get to come back. Thank you.
May I ask him a question?
Sure. We have an empty seat, I think, if you want to.
No, I appreciate it.
Your comments are so good that maybe you should be sitting in the empty seat.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I'm coming late to the game.
Yeah.
I would. It's a good thing. Hopefully, my wife can hear this, but I would be open to joining and participating, and I promise you that I can bring a lot of strengths. My brother Tony Montelli from Oddfellows is here to support me tonight. I know that I can bring Boy Scouts. I can bring a lot of members of this community that can put the blood, sweat, and tears that I think is what we really need right now.
Well, hopefully you signed up for one of the focus groups. And if you didn't, if you'd see Cindy Zafopoulos, she would be glad to sign you and your brother both up. But here's the question I wanted to ask. What sort of thing do you see happening at the Carnegie Building to bring in revenue?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I just want to extend that concept of the model, specifically on any of our two-story buildings, of how Oddfellows and or Masons or even Native Sons operates, is that instead of these being potentially completely just community assets that are underutilized, is there a way for us to capture revenue so that this isn't such a burden on the city?
Thank you.
So,
can I just ask, how often do the Scouts meet there?
the Scouts, the Boy Scouts meets once a week, and the Girl Scouts meet once a week, as far as I know.
And Cub Scouts are there?
There is no existing Cub Scouts right now.
Oh,
There was not a dad to step up or a mom.
gotcha.
So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we can move on to new business, 5.1, update on the community workshops. Gene?
Good evening, Jean Holsten from Bread of Life, doing some public engagement work for you. So, hopefully at your tables where you are, you have a sheet that says SHAPE Project Community Workshops. This is just the very beginning of the compilation. So many of you were at these workshops. There were 2 of them last week. One had 31 people there. The other one had 32 people, including some council members, some SHAPE committee members, some city staff, plus members of the public. What you have is just a brief overview of the demographics of the people, and then we asked them to rate the buildings in terms of the highest priority. What's the for you who are there, if you were going to rate this building as the thing that needs to be paid attention to the most, how would you rate them? And that's where those ratings come in. What we have not compiled yet is all of the information about whether it's rehab, remodel, sell, lease, that kind of stuff. So we have not compiled that, but we will. What I wanted to do with this time is to just ask those of you that are on the committee who attended those, what did you think? What was your takeaway from it? Is there something we need to do differently when we do it next time? What did you think about it?
Well, the people that I spoke with that attended, that I asked to come and they came, they were just really amazed at how wonderful it was and what a great job everybody did, and all the information, people got along even if they didn't agree with the next person that what they was talking about it. And they were very up and glad that this was done. So that was my take. And I enjoyed listening to their comments when I was there.
And just to let you know, we went through a similar process to the speed dating kind of process that we did with you, having people look at the buildings and really talk to each other. So,
what I thought being there is just that my demographic wasn't represented, so I'm so grateful that Jason and Tony came tonight, because we need more of that, and maybe next time more just specific asks. I'll work with Cindy so we can work on getting more people there.
The feedback I received, Jean, was essentially the same as Suzanne's. I had several people from that coffee group that I attend on Thursday morning who came to one or the other, and they were very enthusiastic. As I told you, we had one person come to that who was totally committed to selling the Adams Street property, completely committed. And he left the meeting saying, I think I was entirely wrong. And this is not a man whose mind is easily changed by his own admission. One thing that I thought was missing from that, and I'm not sure how we're going to get it, is some interchange among the attendees or the people in the community over what they want out of all of this. What is St. Helena to them, and what do they want it to be? Do they want us to just feed Main Street so that we have more jewelry shops and tasting rooms and so forth? Or do they want something that they would call local serving businesses? And I mean, we've heard all this, but it would be very helpful, to me at least, to feel that I was getting more feedback earlier on from that thing. Maybe that will come up in some of the focus groups, maybe not, but that was a gap that's a gap I feel.
I brought along one friend, and the reaction was exactly the same as Suzanne. Very enthusiastic after the meeting.
My reaction was pretty similar. I think people were really appreciative of the fact that we got them involved early in the process so that they can hopefully keep coming back over and over again. I think that was probably the biggest benefit. People appreciated the chance to discuss and hear other people's points of views. I'm a little bit undecided about whether it was a good idea to ask people to vote on what they want done with properties. By my count, we're in our 10th meeting here, and I don't think I could even tell you what the best use is of all these properties. I think we're still a long way from that. So maybe it's good to have people give an initial read, but I'm not sure we should tally those up and use them very strongly, because I think we're a long way from that sort of thing being relevant. I'll make one small comment that I was a little disappointed when you did the counting 1, 2, 3 around the room. People were really terrible at that, and part of it was gamesmanship, because there were a couple people sitting side by side and they went 1, 1. It's like they clearly wanted to be in the same group, and I was a little bit disappointed because the point of the meeting was to hear other people's opinions, to not try to sit in the same group with the people you already know and have already talked to. We're supposed to be sort of exposing each other to different ideas. So I was just a little disappointed to see the little game playing going on. It's like, really? You can't count to 3? So.
I thought it was very well done also, and I attended the one in the afternoon on the Wednesday. I was just looking at the matrix. Was there any matrix developed that talked about some kind of ranking of what people would like to see as kind of civic activities or functions, independent of the individual buildings? Was there any input or ranking of the kinds of things people would like to see existing in the properties, in the city properties in general? Say, in addition to city government departments, was there any talk along that line?
There were some
clear.
There were some in the comments which we're compiling for you.
Oh.
And remember, it's not meant to be some sort of a survey or a vote in that it should sway you. It's just getting the pulse of the people that were willing to show up for these things, just as another data point, simply. So.
Well, and no knock, but I think that it's also important to point out, and, you know, we have to look at the demographics, you know. So it isn't, I'm glad we collected some of that information. And maybe we can work out getting a better diversity of the town through the focus groups.
And in line with what Anna said, I think one of the big problems is that what's happening here is meant to take care of what's going to be happening when our children are growing up and our children's children are growing up. And if we have nobody there that's, well, the biggest group were 62 to 79. So if we don't have these guys there and many others there, then they're missing an opportunity to really make a difference in the rest of the lifetime of this city. So they should really be, we should make an outreach to get to that crowd. Your crowd really should make an outreach. It's important. The other thing that I noticed was that basically listening to this, I was hearing people who were where we were on the first night, and they hadn't had the benefit of seeing the property. So I didn't expect to hear a lot of great ideas, and understandably, there wasn't much that we hadn't already covered and hadn't been thought of. And hopefully there's a way to follow up so that those same people, if they want to, will be able to either take a tour of the buildings or go meet again and progress, even if they're a little bit behind us, until they're valuable. So they're doing it for them more than they're doing it for us. So it would be great if they could continue on in the process.
One of the reasons we did this at this stage is actually in part to your point. This is fairly early in the process. You know, this group is at a place where they're determining criteria and a framework to make the decisions. So there's no decisions whatsoever that have been made, which is the perfect time to make sure that you're going and getting public comments. So the people are thinking, oh my God, this is on my radar screen. And I don't even know how you heard about it, but I think it's great that people are talking about it. It also means that you're going to have some misinformation, and people might be coming at you with, you've already made a decision. So just be prepared for that, you know, to be able to say, no, we haven't. Here's where we're at in the process, and you are welcome to come to these meetings. There will be another set of public forums, and there's 2 sets of focus groups. So not only would I encourage you guys to sign up, but to get other people to as well, and let Cindy know, let me know, because we're populating them right now. They're going to start in a couple of weeks. So let me tell you a couple of takeaways I had from this group, from listening to folks. What I heard a number of people say was, I came in here, it's kind of like just exactly what Glenn was saying. I came in here either with an idea about some building, but I started listening to people and I realized, wow, there's a lot of pieces to be thinking about. And I love the idea of listening to other people's ideas and talking that through. And I think that for your process, as well as inviting the public into that, is going to be crucial. So that people are able to start thinking about it. You are so far ahead of the game with all of the information you have, and there's no way that people from the public are going to most likely read what you've read, be as familiar as you are, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be talking about these buildings and understanding the process that you've been involved in, and to be a part of this as well as the council, because the thing we don't want is for you to do all of this work, come to the council with recommendations that you've really thought through, and have a huge public outcry that says we were never a part of this, and it gets shuttled like I've heard the 2009 vision. We don't want that. So we want as much information out about what you're doing as possible so people can be involved. And when we give them the opportunity to talk to each other, boy, it makes all the difference in the world. So please keep sending us people for the focus groups. We've been getting yours and we're compiling them, and we're going to make sure that we have a good broad section of the city. So we will be getting you more information as we tally the comments, so you'll see what people thought. Remember, it's their very initial perceptions. Part of what I think is really important is to know which buildings folks are really interested in. Any other questions or comments on this item?
Yeah, did you say there would be another workshop, or no, now we're just going to move into focus groups?
No, there's one more when you get more into the recommendations portions of it.
All right.
You know, I really think we have to do something about communicating with the younger groups. And I'm obviously not a younger person, so it's hard for me to know. So I'm sitting here thinking, PTA? Do we still have PTA meetings?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know Mark went with Oliver to Kiwanis and did a presentation, and maybe Mark or Jean or Roseanne or somebody needs to go where those people gather. I mean, I understand they're busy. They have children. They have to take them to activities and, feed them and all that stuff. So I think that we really need to make more of an effort than we've made to appeal to people between 20 and 50. If that means going where they are, then we need to do that.
I think that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
If we can't get young people to come, then I think maybe we have to think like young people, which is not to be afraid, more daring, more adventurous, so we can represent them in some odd way here. Does that make sense? Or? Because the older I get, the more fearful I get, the more resistant to change, more capital preservation, leave it the way it is. My kids are going, Dad, lighten up. I go, yeah, okay. And, that's the way it is. As we get older, we just, we don't want so many moving parts. Change is an impact on us, and, I'm still trying to get used to the social media. I'm not sure if I really like social media. I mean, I like face-to-face. I don't like Facebook. So, I mean, we're in a kind of a challenge because the way it goes in this town is pretty much older people are making the decisions. I had this young lady come to my house. I have teenage sons. They live with me, and they bring a lot of friends over. And I ask them, so what do you think? I talk about shape. Well, they don't know all the ins and outs, but they say, man, this town's boring. There's not a lot to do here. I don't play football. I have nothing to do really at the school. I'm not challenged. There's no opportunities. There's no culture for me. There's nothing to engage with, and they can't wait to like graduate and leave. And so I feel like that's a drag, because that's not the way it was when I grew up. We had a lot of things, but I lived in a much bigger town. So I think that we have to think on behalf of younger people if we can't get them to come, is what I'm saying. That makes
Pat,
sense.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
That's right.
I had sent a suggestion to, I think, Mark and Cindy, I think, too, a couple of weeks ago, that one way to capture young people is to go down to the library when they are having kids programs and capture the young mothers who bring their little children there. You've got a room. The library folks can take care of the kids, as they do anyway, and you could capture the moms and maybe some dads. But that might be a way to get some younger people in a. So anyway, that's just, one idea among, I'm sure there'll be many.
Anybody else?
Is there a line item, budget line item for promotions or advertising or like a pizza dinner or something like that we have to help to help engage these people? I mean, if you're a younger person and maybe having a pizza dinner when you come in, so you don't have to worry about dinner, you can just come in because you're not eating earlier in the day. Or if we have a line item for advertising, maybe we make a banner to go across Main Street. Or maybe there's ways to engage with people to help get that word out there.
The city has some modest resources that can be provided. Some of those, however, are being allocated for this film, this short little promotional video, which should be available probably within a week. And so that will be very helpful to have and can be used in social media circles, et cetera. And I've been corresponding with the city clerk about a couple of other strategies, or maybe it was corresponding with the finance director. But certainly we can reach out to the school district directly, work through our recreation programs, and really turn up the recruitment nozzle and awareness. So we're doing our best to get out, and I know a couple of you have been speaking with other groups, but it really will be very helpful to the staff because we're just a couple of folks. It would be very helpful for us, for each of you, to reach a few additional people. So the challenge would be let's have each of us try to bring 3 people to a future meeting, and then ask those people to recruit others and really work together at trying to raise awareness and grow the following.
And what's the timing and the sense of urgency? I mean, here we are kind of getting to some of the brass tacks as a group. For focus groups, are we looking like we've got the next 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks to get people engaged? Or is it, this is something that's going to kind of be ongoing and continue as we pass the baton to the city council? Or what's kind of the
We're in the process of assembling the focus groups now. I think we actually do have some pretty good younger demographics, but we're sorting that out right now. And those begin, I believe, on March 15th. Is that right? The 15th, 16th, and then the following Monday. And so those will be the first round of focus groups. And we'll come back again in April with those same individuals and others if they're interested.
Okay, item 5.2, the long-range financial forecast, April.
We're just getting everything set up, and I'll switch with Cindy.
Also, just while we're getting this going, a quick question is there any way, Mark, we would want to have a synthesized message or almost a script so that when we're reaching out to different groups or reaching out to different people, we're sending the same message, whether it's Suzanne reaching out to the Historical Society or Anna talking to the school, that we're saying the same thing. We're the SHAPE group, and we're looking for people to help us do A, B, C, D, and that way there's a clear message to everyone that we're asking them to do what we need them to do, but we're saying it in a way that's, cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little leery of scripting something for everybody to say. We've all been together for a while. I don't know, for me, it's reasonably clear, I think, that we're trying to get people engaged in the process, and we're, trying to figure out what to do with the facilities and infrastructure that we have, which we also have to pay for. And there'll be various, ways of doing that as well. But right now, we're trying to get input from people, and I think the workshop started that. We have had some people, from the public showing up at some of the meetings. I wouldn't want to script something, because I also think we all have our own biases, too. And so depending on who we're talking to, and listening to them, you may, I don't know. I'd rather, but I do. I engage a lot of people, so I don't know if, and I would imagine most of us around here are. So there may be a silent engagement going on as well. But I do believe, I think we maybe could do a slightly better job than we did with the communication on the last workshop. I remember asking a question, not of Mark, of somebody else, about putting a banner up, over Main Street about the workshops, and the first words that came out of the person's mouth was, well, that's really expensive. And I'm thinking, well, wait a second. If we're going to be spending $10 to $20 million on potential facilities, I mean, how really relatively expensive could that be? And maybe I was going to engage, and then I thought it was being done, but I would have blasted posters all over town on window fronts, and certain areas where there's, places where you can put things up, like outside the backside of, Steve's Hardware, or in front of, the bicycle shop. And I mean, so I think the next time around we got to do that maybe more ahead of time. And maybe we can get a little bit bigger, bolder print from the newspaper above the fold on the upcoming workshops, more in advance than, a couple days before it. Thank you, Jesse. So I think we can do it a little bit. I think we were just slightly behind the curve on it. I think we can get ahead of it and get more participation. Yeah.
One more quick question for Mark. On the 15th and 16th, do you have a time of day that you're anticipating?
We're going to have different times of day, so it depends. Hopefully, we're going to plug people into when they can come.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, because you're going to be reaching out to those folks individually and trying to set it up, so it's not going to, I mean, I would hope you'd get pretty close to 100% participation, and yeah.
Okay, we're ready for the long-range financial forecast. In front of you are two different documents for your review. One was emailed to you yesterday afternoon, so that's the draft long-range financial forecast. Delete the one we emailed last night because there was an error on it. This is the actual corrected version. If you like it digitally, just let Cindy know and we'll email you a copy. But this is the corrected version. We are taking it to City Council for their review and discussion as well on March 13th. The second document.
Wait, excuse me.
Yes.
What was the? Because I looked at the old one, so without having to reread this whole. So.
Oh, it's like where's Waldo? I decided I wanted to add another $800,000 for Upper York Creek for a third year as opposed to just 2 years.
That was that. Okay.
Yeah. So that was it. So it does make year 3 look a lot better right now in the new forecast. The second document are just copies of the slides that I'll be going through. I'm just doing a very high level overview of what the financial forecast is. So the first slide that we want to discuss is what exactly is a long-range financial forecast or forecast, LRFF. It does provide a current and long-range financial forecast. It does identify any significant issues that may need to be addressed. And so what the forecast is meant to do is if you see a big dip in a number, those are the things you want to start looking at. Okay, how can we address it earlier rather than when it comes upon us? It's important to know that it is not a budget. So when City Council looks at this and it's going to be a receive and file item, it's not going to be our budget document. That's a completely separate document. It does utilize assumptions. And a main point for the assumptions is that it was ironic. I was looking through my Government Finance Review magazine, quarterly magazine. It's put out by, Government Finance Officers Association. And one of the things I highlighted, which I thought was kind of funny, is they said, make it clear that the assumptions will be wrong. So we just want to make it clear the assumptions are just that, assumptions. You can never get the assumptions right, but we do our best on the assumptions based on historical data as well as local economics, as well as looking at what do we think the city is going to do, especially in the case of a recession. And then it offers several scenarios based on these assumptions. And it is a good idea to typically update the long-range financial forecast annually. The assumptions that we did make for the long-range financial forecast, they're broken down into two categories. One is the revenue assumptions, the other is the expenditure assumptions. So for revenues, our baseline, which is our baseline model, is based on a continuing modest economic recovery. It is similar to actual revenue growth the city has incurred over the past 10 years, taking out the Great Recession that we had. So we did take those numbers out for the revenues, but over the last 10 years, it is based on actuals. The second scenario assumption that we have is a baseline with a recession, and this assumes a recession during fiscal years 2021 and 2022. There are no indications on when a recession is going to happen. Initially, they were estimating fiscal year 18. We're almost to the end of it. We have not started seeing that yet. So for the long-range financial forecast, we just put it in there for 21 and 22. It takes the average growth and decline. So this is the mathematics behind the recession numbers that we used. What we did is we looked at the actual recession numbers we had from 08, 09, and we took the average for those 2 years. So let's say if 1 year is a negative 5, it's a 5% decline, and then a 10% increase. We took the average of those two, and we applied that equally to 2021 and 2021-22. And then what we did is we took the baseline forecast for what we thought our revenue growth is going to be. The third year coming out of the recession, we did half of that as the growth. So if we estimated a revenue growth was going to be 5%, for that third year, we did it at a 2.5% as opposed to a 5%. And then, so that was the last items that we take to half.
Can I ask a question on that?
Absolutely.
So it sounds like for the next recession, whenever it happens, we're using the Great Recession as the example. Is that a sort of an extreme worst case scenario then, because we're taking the worst recession in the last 80 years?
We are taking the Great Recession as a baseline. In our original, or the actual numbers, the Great Recession, the recovery was actually 3 years long as opposed to 2 years. So we tried to come up with a mathematical formula. And
what at least the conversation we had, we had the information from the Great Recession, but then we backed it off and said, let's assume, and I think we got it 50% or something like that, or 60% of that number, and so not saying it was as severe. Since we're on the recession one, I did send a note to these guys earlier today because I did some more research and some more reviewing, and my personal opinion right now, and granted it's draft, and all comments welcome, and so we're going to review it. My opinion right now is that we've probably even gone too severe with this recession scenario that we're talking about here. So I think the standard baseline is pretty solid. The recession one's the one that is the hard one to get to, right? You're trying to predict what you think the next recession is going to be like, when's it going to hit, and how severe is it going to be, and how quickly are you going to jump back. But I think that's the one that can be massaged a fair amount still.
Can I just ask a quick question about the baseline? This is based on a continuing modest economic recovery. Is that a national economic recovery that's modest? Because on the national level, it's certainly not modest. This has been an unbelievably good economic recovery over the last many years. So if we're basing it on an economy that's just modest, we're actually doing pretty well generally as an economy overall.
And we did base it on what our actuals have been over the past few years. So since the Great Recession, what we've done is we've actually looked at, in each of the categories, they're definitely weighted because your property tax, sales tax, and TOT. So those three items bring in most of your revenue for your general fund. And so that's definitely heavily weighted. So what we've done is we've actually looked at what our average growth has been, and we've taken the number from there, and we have made some minor adjustments.
And what that means with respect to the last 3 years is that the growth moving forward is a little bit less aggressive than the growth that we've experienced in our revenues over the last 3 years. So if we look at numbers for a couple of those categories, I think they were in the 7, 9, 11 range, but we're using something closer to 5. Is that right, April?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And then also in the expenditure baseline as well, we looked at the same areas where you have services and supplies, so you have certain, and personnel, where after the Great Recession we had layoffs, we didn't use services and supplies during that time, and then we ramped up. So instead of keeping it ramped up at that same level, we tried to level it off a little bit in the expenditures as well. Okay, I'll go on to the third. So this is a baseline with a hotel in year 4. So again, this is for the revenues. We added $600,000 in TOT beginning in fiscal year 22-23. So we're looking at a modest-sized hotel. I think we determined between 30 and 50 rooms. Is that what it was? So we did a baseline with the hotel just so you could see what the numbers look like, and then a baseline with the hotel in year 4 with the recession model as well. For our expenditures, so here you'll see the baseline is on a continued modest economic recovery using similar to what we did for the revenues. It is similar to actual expenditure growth the city has incurred over the last 10 years. We did take out some of the major items. For instance, City Council just about 2 months ago in a council meeting approved a contract for $300,000 for the EIR for the general plan. We took that $300,000 out of there. So some of the higher items, I know our attorney's expenses have been higher in the previous years. This year it's significantly lower. We took the lower amount, and all of the expenditure growth is based on the fiscal year 18 adjusted budget, taking out those large, we know what are one-time expenditures. And then what we did do is we did put in modest capital improvements. We did not take the numbers from EMG just because we feel like the amounts that we've put up here are probably more realistic on what the general fund can handle. So for 18-19, we put in $100,000 in capital improvements, 19-20, $300,000, 21 and 22, $400,000 in each of the years, and then for fiscal year 23 and beyond, we added $500,000 in capital improvements.
So these would be funds that would, this is the same category as what EMG created?
That is correct. So it's a transfer from general fund over to our civic capital.
Okay, so this, I think that adds up to $4.2 million over 10 years, and I think the total for EMG was like 6.6 or something like that for just the repairs. Not that we're necessarily going to recommend that we repair every building in place, but just as sort of a comparator. Is that right?
That is, it's actually, this is a little bit lower. One of the models Mark and I had talked about doing was taking EMG, it was at $2.9 million in this current year, then I can't remember what it was over the following 10 years. What we did is we did run some scenarios where we took out any improvements to City Hall. So I can't remember what the total dollar amount was for that. Took the remaining improvements, extrapolated that over 10 years, and that would have been $685,000 a year if we did all the improvements removing City Hall. So it was another scenario we played with, but we felt this was a little more realistic to what our general fund could actually produce.
So this is without City Hall?
This is this model has just numbers in, and it doesn't include any of the EMG. If we ran the EMG models and just broke it out over a 10-year period, it would be $685,000 a year, not including City Hall. Yeah, so these numbers are definitely not representative of everything on the EMG report.
I kind of like the approach. I mean, one could even say, if you wanted a cleaner baseline, one could say, let's not put any capital improvements in there. So then you have a more of a fund to funds, review, and then and the little bit of the discussion that took place was, I mean, what's going to come out of this group is really going to have a bigger impact on what the capital improvements are. So they put something in there, and Mark's idea was, we're already almost through fiscal year 18, and you're barely going to get started even if you start kicking off some of these major, repair jobs or improvements. So I think that's why the number sort of starts and then it gets to a place. But it's really just a placeholder. And I mean, we shouldn't, at least I'm not going to pay any attention to these these capital improvement numbers at all in my decision-making process. I mean, we're going to come up with more creative solutions for the younger folks in town to, so.
But I think it's a it's a really useful number because the forecast itself looks really solid as a baseline, plus it's generating, essentially it's $4.2 million of start money
Yeah,
for
so as
us
long as
to
we don't have
play
a
with.
recession, we're fine.
Yeah, as long as there's not something slightly below a great recession, we're okay. But yeah, I just wanted to know if that was money that's dedicated to what we're doing here, more not dedicated, but it's available for the solutions that we will be proposing.
Yeah, I think the way to look at it really is, I'm going to look at it without these numbers even in there. And I'm going to look and say, well, here's baseline revenue, here's baseline expenditures, so what's available? That's how I'm going to look at it. And that's,
When we look at a capital expenditure, is the definition of that? I mean, from what we've been talking about, it's here's an old building, we need to fix it. But there's a competition for the capital improvement dollars, whatever they are, right? That's available. Does that include street repairs and things like that, or is that allocated as part of a line item within the city budget already?
That's allocated more as a line item. So the capital improvements are specific towards civic, so it is for the buildings. You'll see in the full draft report, you'll see itemized list of the transfers out. And the transfers out from general fund, you'll see specifically the maintenance of effort for Measure T and for SB1, which is out of streets. These particular items are strictly just civic buildings.
So, and so this is more like Mark said, it's the leftovers, right? You bring it in, you spend it, and what's left, and what can we use that for then, right?
So in this expenditures number, just to clarify, you don't have the transfers out.
Yes, we do have transfers
Okay, so
out.
the transfers out are in there.
The transfers out are in there for the 4 different scenarios that were presented.
Okay.
The capital improvements that are listed in here are just civic, and we gave that to you as an example on what we said we're looking at possibly for civic, not doing the full EMG numbers, but the total transfers out. You'll see when we get to the scenarios, it's 1.2 million, 1.4 million. So you'll see it's significantly higher than what this is. This is just for civic buildings.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to make, is that the long-range forecast that we're looking at has this already subtracted out as an expense, and at least in the baseline, it still looks quite good, even with the 4.2 already spent.
Yes, that is correct. Oh, well, the 4.2 for the EMG?
No, the 4.2 for this transfer to capital improvements, that's an expense in this forecast, right?
Over the long range, yes. And then the second assumption that we've made for the expenditure is a baseline with a recession. And so again, we assumed a recession during 2021 and 21-22. And then based on when the last recession, when we had the Great Recession, there's a little bit of a lag time on when it actually affects our sales tax, our property tax, our TOT. So what we did in the baseline with recession model for expenditures is we placed a hold on salary, supply, and service growth for fiscal year 22, 23, and 24, 25, and that is very similar to what happened after the Great Recession. So here we will look at the first scenario for the baseline. And again, I apologize for the smallness of it. In the back of the full report, there are a little bit larger versions in the back that are a little easier to see. So here you can kind of see where all those numbers come out into play. So for fiscal year 18 revised, you'll see the very bottom, you want to look at the ending fund balance and your unassigned net position. And so you'll see at the end of fiscal year 18, we're anticipating $3.7 million in our ending fund balance, which means a 27% of unassigned net position. And then you'll see when we have the baseline, I believe it was Tim you mentioned, it's looking pretty good. Just on the baseline, you'll see we actually get up to, in fiscal year 24, 12.7 million, 79%. The following year, 18 million at 103%. So you can see where the numbers definitely trend up on the baseline, and this is not assuming any type of recession.
That's the reserve, right?
Yes, that's the unassigned reserve. So that money would be available for civic improvements, for whatever council discretion is, because at that point it would be the discretionary funds. Right now, council does have a policy of keeping at least a 25% reserve. So scenario 2, the baseline with a recession. So here you can see where we've built in some of those models. So here you can see we start out this exact same numbers for fiscal year 18, 19, and 20. We're up to the 39%. 21, we're about the same at 37%. And then you see the recession starting to go in there. So you'll see with the baseline with the recession right now, we're looking in fiscal year 2023, about a 14% reserve, dropping down to a 12%, and then slowly building back up again once the recession, climbing out of the recession. Your scenario 3 is your baseline with the hotel in year 4. So you'll see here again, the first 3 years are looking the same. The 4th year, it's a little bit higher at 48% because we did not factor into a recession. And then adding the new a modest hotel with projected about $600,000 each year in TOT. We did not extrapolate that over to sales tax or other things that more visitors might be spending. So we just did it strictly on transient occupancy tax. And then you'll see in years 23, 24, and 25, 26, you'll see the numbers gradually incline of $600,000 a year plus the regular growth rate. And then the final scenario that we've presented is a baseline with recession and the hotel as well. So here you can see in contrast with just a recession without having the hotel. Without the hotel, you dip down to the low point of 12%, and with the hotel in a recession, the forecast is saying it dips down to 20% as opposed to down to the 12%. So those are the 4 different scenarios that are presented. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Mark's here as well to answer any questions.
I have a question from the one I've read today, which apparently is not all that different. It's just $800,000 for, okay. Where you're talking about expenses, you mentioned debt service. And my question is there a formula showing how much debt service as a percentage of the total costs is acceptable?
We have not done that analysis yet on what our debt capacity ratio is. Right now, we virtually have no debt. I think our general fund debt is paid off, I want to say, by 2020, and we have $70,000 a year in payments for our general fund debt. So that is pretty unheard of almost for any city to actually have no general fund debt. So we're definitely in a good position there, but we have not run our debt capacity ratios.
And the pie chart shows 2% of the total budget.
Of the total budget.
Is debt service. So essentially that's 0%, you're saying?
Yeah, it is very low. Our full general fund debt will be paid off very soon.
Okay.
Could you speak to the risk that could be reflected in the possibility of not having a volunteer fire department?
That's a great question, and frankly, it is an asterisk that overrides this entire analysis because what we have is a department that does about 1,000 calls for service every year. That's about 3 calls a day. Each call is about a half hour. I think I've mentioned this before to a number of different groups. We're basically paying for about an hour and a half of service each day, whereas others are paying for 24. I think you're probably looking at upwards of $2 million a year annually to sustain a full-time fire department. What would happen in our case is probably a transition, and we considered modeling something like that. You might consider, full-time person during the day, because that's frankly our challenge right now is making sure that we have enough people to respond to calls during the day. So what if we needed to enhance the number of people there and put someone in the station during the day, 12 hours a day? And so that probably is 3 bodies to the city, $300,000 a year, and then it would potentially ramp up after that. But there are so many other ancillary benefits that come from this volunteer fire department, the philanthropy, the community, the contributions that they make. And so what we're hoping to do is ensure their sustainability, and it's one of the things that we're working with the department on this year is making sure that that remains sustainable long term.
And I did want to point out...
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
First of all, I appreciate the listing of all the risks in here. I think there's 7 of them, and then through the scenarios, you added another uncertainty with respect to the hotel. So there are 8 uncertainties listed in here. 2 of them were run through scenarios, the volatile economy and the hotels. And this isn't directed at you, maybe more to the group here, is that each one of these represents an uncertainty, and it goes to your comment that this forecast is wrong. That doesn't mean it's not useful. It depends how wrong it is. And that's where uncertainty comes in, is we have extra knowledge that tells us how much variation there might be in that. So I don't know how much time we really have to treat this as a probabilistic problem and go through a full probabilistic treatment of it, but I think at some point it's at least worth a discussion on something like the fire department. It's a big risk, but what's the probability of that happening? Is it 50%? Is it 5%? I think we could make a reasonable estimate about how likely that is to occur, and maybe the same thing with some of these other ones. So, that we don't want to freak out about the fire department unless it's going to happen, but we do need to take it into account with the proper assessment of what the likelihoods are.
That's a great point. I did want to point out in Appendix K, so it's the very last page of the document, that will show you the schedule of transfers, just so you can see the dollar amounts per year. And this is based off of that, I won't call it modest, $100,000 to $500,000 capital improvements, I think are pretty good. But that's based on using those particular numbers, as well as anything else that we know has to be transferred. So whether it was already council approved or the maintenance of effort that we have for Measure T and SB1. But like I said, page 30 will give you an idea of what the transfers were that we included in this forecast.
There are a couple pages I wanted to point out for people just so they can get to understand the baseline and the forecast growth assumptions. If you look at page 7 of that document and then also page 8 of the document, you'll see here where you've got the history of 15, 16, 17, and 18's estimate and what the changes were year over year over year, and then you'll see 19 to 28 the forecast assumptions that were used. So and really, the ones to focus on would be property tax, sales tax, and TOT. That's obviously the lion's share of the revenue numbers. And I would venture to say that they've been reasonably conservative on those numbers at this point in time based on history, but it makes a little bit of sense too, because history doesn't necessarily continue to repeat itself at the same levels that it has in the past. So anyway, I think that's a good schedule to look at, and also likewise on page 8, but not 8, wait a second, what was the other one? There was an expense one, a couple down. Where was the expense table? Oh, let's see. Where's the expense table?
12.
Page 12.
12.
Oh, I'm sorry, page 13 gives you what the forecast, the expenditure assumptions.
Yeah, but does it have the history of the year-over-year changes like the revenue did?
The 13 does, I think.
It has 17 and 18, I guess, which gives you a little bit of a feel for it. And I think the salary and benefits number is because there was an increase in staff, I guess, in 18. It says it's up 17%.
That is when the fire department transitioned from being paid per call to actually being paid at an hourly rate. So that was one of the biggest transitions in fiscal year 18. In addition, we had an additional staff member added to the Public Works Department as well as City Clerk's Department.
Okay.
And right now, our total salary and benefits, including our PERS liabilities, is about 56% of our general fund budget.
I want to ask a question about the the pension liabilities. I believe in the report you mentioned that you're having a study done by a company, and I assume that's an actuarial firm.
Yes, it is.
PERS is going to tell you something, and I think they backed the interest rate down from 7.5 to 7.25 or something along that line. Is this firm looking at what maybe a more realistic long-term interest rate would be, to have a sense of not just what CalPERS is going to ask for over the next few years, but what is it really going to cost?
That I don't know. I can follow up with the company tomorrow and ask. They are giving us a 10-year forecast on it.
They're also looking, and that PERS rate is coming down. Their expected return is transitioning down from 7.5% to 7% over a few years. Maybe it should be lower. But they will be looking at all of the retirees that are on the books the different pension formulas that different people have, probability for investment returns, and frankly, one of the challenges right now for CalPERS, even though the returns in the market have been very good over the last couple of years, PERS lost so much money several years ago that their risk portfolio, their ability, their willingness to take certain risks has been reduced, and therefore they're in more conservative investments. And in some ways that works, and in other cases they miss opportunities for growth. But it's a risk to the overall fund, and so their numbers have been, their performance has been lower than what the market has been returning for most investors, and that's been a source of discussion in local government circles. But this firm has the best reputation in California for getting it right, and we're happy to be working with them to refine our numbers. So we're going to do our best at trying to identify what those dollars are. We can guess, and that's sort of, PERS gives us numbers and we forecast, but this is an effort to try to be even more accurate on our forecasting.
I had a quick question on, I don't know much about CalPERS and how that works, but let's say there's an employee and they retire, and you read that, they receive 80% of their annual salary every year. Is that something that affects our budget here in town, or is that all handled through CalPERS and is kind of already factored into this?
It happened. It has an effect on us, and you'd have to work a long time to get 80% of your salary. I will tell you that. A very long time. There is a new rule called PEPRA that took effect in 13 or 14, and that reduced the pension formula for new employees, public safety and non-safety. The silver lining for a lot of transition at City Hall is that half of our employees are now in that new PEPRA formula, so we're more affordable. And the other, I guess, good news for the city of St. Helena is we've never retired a firefighter. And so we don't have firefighters on the books, whereas other communities spend substantially more, and it increases their pension costs. And so we have a competitive advantage in many respects because we don't have all of our public safety personnel retired on the books here.
There is one number I want to just point out for people on scenario one, in case you're looking at this stuff later tonight or tomorrow or whatever. If you look on line 4 on expenses and you look at fiscal year 20, you'll see that fiscal year 20 is less than fiscal year 19, and you might look at that and go, how could that be? Well, what happened was it drops off. There in 18 and 19, there's $800,000 that's been transferred to the water enterprise, and that stopped. So there's just this little anomaly in there, and then, of course, things start increasing again on a normal scale. But just in case you looked at that and said, how could spending go down from 19 to 20, that's the lion's share of why.
Can I ask a probably overly detailed question? I have a lot of them, but I'll send them to you offline.
Thank you.
So in the recession scenarios, it seems like the revenues coming out of the recession were handled in two different ways. Some of them basically dig a hole in the recession and then have to climb out with the annual percentage changes, and some of them are restored to the pre-recession levels. So TOT, for example, after the recession, those bump back up to pre-recession levels, which kind of makes sense. Once the recession's completely over, people come back again. Sales tax, on the other hand, has to dig out of its hole. Why was that one treated differently? It seems kind of like after the recession that sales would pick back up to pre-recession levels and go from there.
I modeled the same trend that happened after the Great Recession, so I actually looked to see what recovered right away and then what took a little ramping up to recover. So I modeled the same scenario that happened before.
I think it's endless, all the assumptions we can make about the future. I mean, we can talk about impeachment, Korean War, et cetera, et cetera. And we can also talk about the fact that, the government's pretty much borrowed out. And so if you go through another big recession, is anybody going to buy our bonds? So it's like endless. But the main thing that I'm kind of wondering is there any argument that there is not going to be a recession? I mean, at what point do we build a consensus, some common baseline of the assumptions where we all agree that going forward, you'll never have a cold again, or you will have a recession? I mean, is that you brought up this whole pro forma of no recession? I mean, is that an argument? Is that a consideration? Is that possible?
Typically, a recession is every 10 years. It's just how much and how large is the recession going to be. They initially estimated 2018 was going to be the next recession. Still have not seen that. The latest forecasts that I have read are anticipating maybe in fiscal year 2021 at this point. I'm actually going to an Economic Outlook Summit on Friday at Sonoma State, so can't wait to see what they say about what their outlook for the recession is. So it's a typical modeling scenario where you always do a baseline for the recessions. Recessions will happen. We just don't know how deep it's going to be.
Well, but the point is there will be a recession. Okay, so it's almost like musical chairs. I remember every period with the stock market, the music got longer, and then you got further and further away from the chairs. And then when the calling happened, it was a long way to get to your chair. And I remember in the stock market that it got crazy. People were just like borrowing money to play the stock market. I mean, that's becoming a problem now. And I remember that it got to the point where you had to jump in because everybody was getting rich. And if you didn't jump in, and then when you did jump in, then there was no chair. So one thing I've noticed in these cycles, they get longer and longer, and the bubble gets bigger and bigger. And then it happens, and you're going, damn, I missed the timing. But I'm on Main Street, so I'm the canary in the cave. Believe me, when there's a little dip, they stop buying art. It's over, and then because I'm like the end of the line. I'm at the bottom of Maslow's needs here, and. So when I see recession, not recession, I think the recession's coming. I've been in the art business 40 years. It's coming. I've been through so many of these.
So how are your sales right now?
It's really quiet there on Main Street. It's spooky. Pretty spooky. I was thinking becoming a firefighter and getting a pension.
Not in St. Helena, you won't.
Oh, yeah. We'll see.
So I think to Oliver's point, and just kind of whatever these models say, they say, and whatever the future holds, it holds. But I think what April had mentioned, which is most encouraging, is that we're just about out of debt. And if you can imagine your household just about out of debt, you can weather a lot more than if you're over-leveraged. And that kind of speaks to us looking forward as it relates to the capital improvements we may need to make, to the different projects we may want to fund or not fund, and being fiscally responsible about how we do that is really important, because we don't want to get to a point where we're trying to fix everything we need to fix, and then we get over-leveraged and the music stops and we can't make it back to the chair. So we're in a really good position right now. I love the fact that we don't have that debt. I think that's a huge a gold star next to our town's name and safety and security. And then, let's figure out how we can, like Jason mentioned earlier, let's not sell a bunch of stuff off. Let's figure out how we can use what we have to fund what we need. And I think we're getting closer to that. But, recession or no recession, because one's coming, and then it's going to go away. And then another one will come, and prosperity will come again. I mean, so it's cyclical, but it's good to have the sideboards on this conversation, but I think it just points right back to let's do the right thing for now and then 50 years from now, right? So anyway, thanks for providing the analysis.
Yeah, and I guess what I want to reiterate is based on some more research I did this morning, that I think we have a fair amount of work to do on the recession scenario. Because if you look at page 8, you'll see, well, we also saw even back in the Great Recession that property taxes were pretty solid, but sales tax, drops 5% and then another 10%, and so you've dug yourself a 15% hole, and TOT is down 10 and another 10, so now you've dug yourself a 20% hole. And I went back and actually looked at a couple of things, if I can get this. And I went and looked at just the previous two, It's not coming up, but if you go back to 90-91, GDP dropped 3.4%, and then I think it was like 4% in the next quarter. So it wasn't nearly as deep as this. And then the 2001 recession was even lighter than that. So I based on looking at that, I think that's maybe more of a normal scenario. And I think again, this is in draft form, and I think, and April's going to go to this conference and maybe come back with some information too, and I think the recession scenario is going to be revised, and so, and that, when we end up sort of looking at what do you want to use, it's maybe somewhere even in between the baseline and the recession scenario, so that's always that thing where you try to pick what is the most likely occurrence, and it's probably neither of the ones on the guardrails. So I think, this is a good start, but we probably have a little more massaging to do. But it's obviously a significant document because it's telling us effectively what cash we have or what borrowing capacity we have. So
it seems to me that obviously it's useful, but like your long-term pension fund, what we're talking about here is doing work for the city that will be long-term, so that if we're worried about taking any risk in the short term and denying ourselves an overall look in the long term and therefore doing nothing, then we're taking the risk of destroying the buildings that we have, the $25 million worth of property. So doing nothing is almost as risky as doing something. So we have to be careful about what we do, but we also need to be creative and a little bit brave, as Oliver points out.
Well, I was a little disappointed when Oliver was sort of focusing on the recession scenario. I thought he'd jump all over the baseline and say, let's be creative and let's build the most beautiful buildings in the world. Well, and all of a sudden he's like going over here into the other side.
I've learned over the years in the movie business that if you start creative with the budget before you start creative with the script, then you're going to end up with a really lousy script. Start creative, and if you have to cut back, you cut back once you get down to the nitty-gritty. Go for the gusto and then see, and then we'll be smart with the money, hopefully, and figure out ways to pay for what we're looking for, so that it pays out over the long term, not just in the short term.
It's interesting.
I think before we get really excited about it, how good it is, we need the answer to the question I asked earlier, because eventually we're going to be looking at probably financing something, and I think we need to know how much risk we can take with financing and have that acceptable as part of the total budget.
Well, COSBOT's going to help us with that. That's really, I think, mostly what we're going to be using them for, the different types of ways of paying for what we dream up and what we create
he knows how we can pay, but is he going to help us to decide what percentage of our budget we can risk spending on paying it back?
Well, that's not the only way to do it, too, though. You can add something to property tax. Just that's how you did the fire station. I mean, there's many alternatives. I mean, maybe it's a combination. As much, to Jason saying he's right. I mean, you only sell something once, but there may be a property that maybe makes sense to dispose of. So there's millions there. I mean, it's not just what will our cash flow be able to support.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I still think that's a good thing to find.
No. Well, we absolutely will get it. I'm sure we'll get it. Yeah. But roughly off the top of my head, I think like $1.3 million a year of debt service funds about anywhere from $12 to $15 million of debt, just as a ballpark off the top of my head. So, I mean, that's a lot of money to do a lot of things with if we feel the cash flow would support it. But again, I mean, that's the kind of information we'll get from COSMOT.
Just a quick question on definition of a couple terms here, April, on municipal budgets. The transfer to other funds, that line item talks about sort of assigned, I don't know if you want to use the term discretionary, but those are assigned projects, if you will. Like on page 15, those are operating funds that are allocated for a variety of city projects.
That is correct. So what?
But they're coming out of operating revenues.
Yes, they come out of the operating revenues, and we transfer them to the other funds for dedicated. Like I said, there's some streets projects that City Council has made a commitment to finish. There's certain Measure T or maintenance of effort. So yes, it does come out of the operating revenues and gets transferred over to those certain projects.
And that capital improvement, the small amount of capital improvements that was chosen to run forward is included in that transfer to other funds.
That is correct. I think it was a $50,000. It was a very, very small dollar amount, and that's typically what we've been doing over the past few years. So I have two separate line items in there. One is a transfer to capital, which is a very small line item, and then the bottom one is the larger for civic projects.
And can you just, for my edification, the definition of what's in services, just that budget item, what types of expenditures are in the services category?
Services are typically contracts that we have. So if we hire consultants to help with the general plan EIR, we do have some consultants that help us out on an as-needed basis for the planning department and the public works department. Our attorney services would be considered under services. So those are the types of things.
Thanks. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Just one more thing. Are there expenses that are just kind of like thrown under the carpet that we can't see?
Like what kind of?
Oh, I don't know. It's like
what other things are we spending money on?
It's a really big carpet. You'd be amazed at how much stuff is under there. No,
I don't know. I just, it's like when I go home, it's like the credit card bill is like a half-inch thick, and I go, what happened here? So, but I don't know. Just like I'm just trying to grasp all these accounting things and all the things in the history, with expenditures, the York Creek Dam, as far as the roads and the sewer and this. It's just like endless. It's like an onion skin. I just keep peeling away. And I had a conversation with somebody today, and they were talking about the roads. And it's only the roads that have been identified that are really being kind of factored into this Measure T. Are all the roads in question as far as being analyzed? How much do we really need to fix all these roads?
I'll let Mark handle that one.
Am I throwing a grenade in the room, or am I?
The roads are actually a lot easier today because of Measure T. So we've been spending on average about almost $400,000 a year. And when we look at the numbers that are projected with Measure T, we're likely going to be looking at north of 1.5 million, north of 1.6 million annually for 25 years, and that number will grow as the economy in Napa County grows. So we are going to have substantial resources. We're maybe not going to be able to bring every road up to its perfect condition within 5 years.
Oliver just wants South Crane taken care of. That's all he wants.
And Grayson.
But
I need a kidney belt to drive home.
I want Grayson.
But you will absolutely notice a change in the street infrastructure, and I would say the numbers that are coming from Measure T, along with our required maintenance of effort, will be enough to put us in a situation where other additional general funded money doesn't necessarily have to go to additional road repairs. We're still going to be investing at least $400,000 of general fund money, but the city could choose to use any of this additional money for roads or buildings or services for the community. It's really up to the council's priorities.
But just in general, I was just asking, is there costs that we just don't know they're there because we don't want to see them? The pipes under the street, are they falling apart? I mean,
there's not a separate set of books.
Yeah.
Well,
not a separate set of books, but just.
So, Oliver, when you talk about pipes under the street, if you're talking about the sewer lines and the water lines, those are part of the water and wastewater enterprises and not part of the general.
But not the flood pipes.
And so, if you're talking about the storm drains, then that right now is a general fund item.
Yeah. No, just in general, I just want to know, is everything on the table? It's not like a different set of books, but it's just, how in accounting sometimes you can just have an emphasis and some nebulous things are just kind of like forgotten.
Who's your accountant? I'd like to.
Well, no, but
is he a CPA?
Well, no, but Mark, we had a history where we found out, we borrowed twice from the state. I mean, it's not like. We've had a history of,
I know, but I think you're saying that does the city know of something they're not telling anybody about?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's the emphasis that, that there are other capital improvements that are not talked about, but they're there. That's what I'm saying.
I think, Oliver, my understanding of what you're mentioning is that there are larger ticket items like the sewer, like whatever, that may need millions and millions or tens of $millions of improvements. Are we, in our model, as we're looking at this annual budget, as we're looking at the expenses, are we contemplating funding some of those things also, or are we looking for floating a bond later on to compensate for that?
But that's in water and wastewater enterprises. That's not part of the general fund budget.
I know, but I hear that all the time. But it's like the left pocket, the right pocket, but they're sewed to the same pair of pants. Just like the York Creek Dam, I've seen the money go out of the general fund to that, and because there's this debate whether it's a water management issue or not. So the criteria changes, the politics changes, and the money can move in and out of these accounts. So it's not like a clear, hard line between the wastewater and the water enterprise and the general. I've seen the money go back and forth. In fact, somebody told me that the city hall that's there now was actually funded by the water management because they couldn't get the public to sign off on the budget. So things do move in and out of these. So if that's the picture, should we be worried about how much other financial obligations we have out there with these other budget areas like the water and sewer management? I want to know the full amount of liabilities that we have and the full picture, not just the ones we've been focused on.
The answer to your question really relates to everything we've been bringing you. So we started with a financial diagnostic that not every city in California has taken the time to complete. And what that story told you was things were largely headed in the right direction. There are some risks, and capital infrastructure was some of those risks. And tonight, this is an effort to update a document that was a couple of years old with current knowledge about what our foreseeable future looks like. And April mentioned the 25% reserve policy that the council's established. That's really intended for those one-time unexpected needs or to help during a recession. But to take care of those big ticket items that are unexpected that we might not foresee. The only thing I can forecast is the storm drain is something that the infrastructure, if it all collapsed tomorrow, then we would have a challenge. But that's one of the reasons why the reserve is 25%, so that we can address that. And of course, there are a number of different financing strategies that the city would have if, in fact, it found itself with a substantial number of dollars needed to repair infrastructure. But this is a very open, transparent document. Our budget has good data on history looking forward. The future looks good. There are risks, and I think we've done a good job of providing additional information that hasn't been available to this community just in the last couple of months. So I really appreciate all the work that April's done, not only with a health diagnostic, but also working this. I mean, this is something that has been worked on aggressively and on top of everything else we're doing. So I know that she was working on Saturday on this document and updating it. So again, I think it's a good representation of where we are today, and I think there's a lot of good news that the city has in store. And I think we have to be careful not to raise concerns about other what-ifs that might happen out there. This is what the budget looks like today, and the council has responsibilities under the law to budget and account for its expenditures in specific funds. So that's why we have enterprise funds that are separate from the general fund. And if we weren't doing things right, we'd be written up for that. One of the reasons that we have an independent auditor come and take a look at the books every year.
Just for my own ignorance, 'cause I'm not quite sure, Mark, you'd mentioned the enterprise fund for the water and sewer. So there's the general fund and there's the expenses that the city has, and then there are other enterprise funds that are separate from that? Is that okay? And are primarily that's water and sewer? Are there other big ones? Or
I think it's water and sewer, right? I mean, that's
water and sewer are two enterprise funds. So if you look at our financials, you'll see there's governmental funds, which general fund is part of governmental funds, and then you have your enterprise funds. And so the enterprise funds, all the statements on it, as far as our reporting requirements, are similar to that of a business. So it's run like a business, where you have your governmental funds, which are accounted for differently. So if you look at our audited financials every year, you'll see the distinction between the two. Within governmental funds, general fund is just one portion of governmental funds. It is one of the largest portions of governmental funds, but I think right now we have 46 different types of funds that by law have to be accounted for separately, so any impact fees go into a separate fund. We have a bocce fund, so basically revenues that come in for bocce can only be spent on bocce. And so we do have certain legal requirements and restrictions to some of those other governmental funds.
So out of the, excuse me.
But this report is just general fund. It's not all the governmental funds, it's strictly general fund.
So when we see the revenues of $13.2 million for fiscal year 18, does that mean that's the amount that we're looking at that are appropriated to the general fund?
Yeah.
And we actually have more revenue coming in than that? That's then dispersed to the water or the bocce or the appropriate category. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. I didn't know that.
I think at one point in time you sent out to us you call it the CAFR or whatever, the annual financial report. I mean, I think it's been sent to us, but if it hasn't, it's online as well, I believe. And I mean, there's a lot of information there. I mean, it might make some people's eyes roll back in their head, but it is there, and it can be helpful, and it does provide you some of that information. There are a lot of other funds, but other than maybe 3 or 4 of them, the water and wastewater enterprise funds, and then there are like the impact fee funds, which are like $2.5 million, I think, or something. I mean, there's some other large funds there as well, but those are restricted funds, as April was trying to say. This is all just unrestricted general fund monies and expenses.
Right. I was just trying to get a context of what are the other outlying things. So
I would point at that annual report. I mean, it really is pretty comprehensive, and we'll bring the whole thing together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just as one more follow-up, there are these measures, the Measure T, the Measure A. Which of those are in place now and are going to continue, and are there any that are going to drop off in the near term?
Measure A is the closest one that's going to be sunsetting for us, and that has to do with the flood control project. So the Measure A funds, the tax for that actually stops on June 30th, but is replaced on July 1st by Measure T. So Measure A is just flood control project. We are all set with that. We're going to do our final drawdown for Measure A to be able to pay off or pay down our SRF loan that we have, and that is not general fund related. That's separate. And then Measure T starts on July 1st of this year. We will not receive our first payment for Measure T until 2019, and that is strictly transportation. So that's the additional $1 to $1.5 million we'll get per year for our road repairs. And that will be accounted for in a completely separate fund than the general fund. And then the other...
That is a 25-year tax. Measure T is going to be in effect for 25 years.
Yes.
It's a half cent. Yes.
And then the other measure that we have right now is Measure D, which was the half-cent sales tax that was approved last year. And so Measure D is strictly general fund. Right now we're estimating about $1.2 million. And in the budget document, it didn't make it in last year's budget document, but the new budget document we will be presenting, we are actually accounting for Measure D monies as a completely separate line item. So at any point in time, we can pull up that particular account number and see exactly how much we've received in Measure D money.
And it doesn't sunset.
And there's no sunset.
There's no sunset on Measure D.
And I might add that what you just said is very thoroughly and nicely explained in what we had to read today, and I'm going to keep it forever in case I forget.
Well, and let me know. I mean, I know that the CAFR is a difficult document to explain. It's myself and then Mandy Kellogg, who's our administrative services manager. Mandy is very well versed. She could tell you the ins and outs of every line item of our CAFR, and that is done by an independent auditor each year. Total fund balance, just so you can get an idea, for fiscal year 18 is about $33 million. So if you include the general fund, you include the water, wastewater funds, and then the other supplemental funds, it's between 30 and 33 million.
Thanks.
Is there any way, just to get a picture of this York Creek Dam scenario?
Oh, come on, that was discussed for the last year.
No,
that's not what we're here for.
I just want to hear exactly what is our liabilities, our financial liability. How much do we need to spend to fix that?
Upper York Creek Dam, the initial estimates for it are $6 million. Currently, we do have $3 million in bond proceeds to use for it. In addition, we have a grant that's over $1 million. I can't remember the exact dollar amount. And then we do have money in our capital improvement projects for it additionally. And then City Council has authorized a one-time transfers or two-time transfers of $800,000 for this fiscal year, next fiscal year, for a total of $1.6 million, and that will cover the full cost of removing the dam.
Okay,
as
so
far as the
that's-
estimates we have.
Okay. So, Pat, I think everybody needed to hear that. You might know, but...
I've been hearing it for a year and a half.
Well, I know, but I think other people here in this room maybe don't know that information.
I've got a quick question, April, thanks. The Department of Public Works, is their long-range forecast for infrastructure maintenance and improvements folded into this forecast scenario?
Yes, it is. So when you see let me take that back. It's not fully folded in. For the projects that we know that have been approved, that is folded into it. And so I work with the Public Works Director, with Erica, and when she's developing her plan, she talks to me and we look to see what we have available. So all of the transfers that are listed in there into other CIP project accounts, those are accounted for in her current plan.
Is that mostly accounted for on the page 15, operating and capital transfers?
It's the transfers.
The 1.4 million there, or 1.5 million in 2018?
That's correct.
And then going forward?
That is correct.
Yeah. And it's pretty much exclusive of the facilities, I think. I'm sorry, you've got capital improvements general in there.
And that's the 100, 200, 300.
Yeah, the 100, 300, and so on. That was just kind of a guesstimate or just a placeholder for facilities, not really knowing what the plan is going to be for all the facilities.
That is correct.
That's
Everything that I have in the schedule of transfers is according to the current approved CIP plan that she projects out 5 years. So what I did is I took what was in her current plan using general fund revenues, and I included in that transfers page.
Is there anything that's not in the need to have, or the wish list, if you will, of the Department of Public Works that's not forecasted or budgeted for some way?
That I would have
the unknowns?
I would have to follow up with her. The items I have in here just reflected or have an effect on the general fund. There are several other projects in her CIP list, but the funding could be coming from gas tax, impact fees. So the funding could be coming from other sources. These are just the projects that have been identified that use general fund monies.
Okay.
Is there any chance that the two new employees in Public Works, either one of them or both of them, are going to be facility managers, somebody to take care of these once we fix them up and put the money in?
Can of worms over on this side of the table.
Anything we fix, we're going to maintain. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is the Public Works Department right now is working on a level of service analysis where they are identifying, are we working on this task daily, every other day, weekly, monthly, quarterly, you name it, or can we need to get to it, but we can't get to it. That will really help us analyze how we're deploying our staff and help us determine whether the level of service is appropriate for the community. We may think that monthly is good enough, but it may need to be weekly. And if we say we're doing it monthly, are we truly doing it monthly, or is it slipping to quarterly or every other month? This is going to be a really helpful tool for us to analyze level of service, and it will be something that I can use to have a conversation with the council about if we needed if we wanted an additional body to take care of something. My expectation would be the staff would help me understand what I would ask, what level of service is going to be enhanced with this extra body, or conversely, if we're in a recession, what level of service for what tasks can be moved from monthly to quarterly, with a retirement or something like that. So we'll have an informed conversation, but we need that analysis first before we can have a more informed conversation about how we deploy the staff and the services they provide.
Could I ask if inspection and maintenance of the flood project levee and wall are included in that list?
It needs to be. I'm asking for everything from that to
Yeah, it
how often
really-
we clean the street lights on Main Street, sweep the streets, mow the lawn at the parks, the grass. So I want everything they do in this list. It's going to be a long list, and we're organizing it by division within the department. So we'll have water and wastewater and streets and buildings, et cetera.
Okay. I'm going to guess there aren't any more questions on 5.2 in the long-range financial forecast, and I can see that there probably aren't any public comments. We've run them out of here. Let's move on to 5.3.
Enough fun with numbers.
Thank you, April, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
Here.
So this is looking at your criteria, your framework for decision-making. Hopefully, we can get the biggest chunk of this done today so that next week and the following few weeks are going to be about talking about the different buildings and some of your recommendations. So the next piece of this is to take some of the information that you generated at the last meeting 2 weeks ago and begin to prioritize it. You're making the decisions, and so let me just sort of remind you, you're making the decisions about these properties in the context of this city. And so our first initial overview of the context is, what are the values? What are the things that are important to you, the aspects of this city? And then what are the things that you want to avoid or mitigate? And what are some of the pressing needs that are floating to the top? So we sent you out the list that you had generated, and we asked you if there was anything missing. So let me tell you what's on the walls behind you. In the blue writing over here on the right is what's important about St. Helena that you wanted to enhance or preserve. And instead of just listing all of those things, I grouped them. So one of the things you talked about were employees. You talked about it in terms of a safe working environment, providing attractive places to work, designated buildings that were designated or designed to meet the needs of the departments. You also talked about gathering places for multiple uses. You wanted to make sure that there was places for, you mentioned some of the things about events, culture, recreation, historic, that kind of thing. You wanted to make sure that in your gathering spaces that locals and tourists were taken care of and that it was comfortable. You talked about having quality buildings and services. Under those, you put things like beautiful, meet the needs of staff and the functions of departments. You talked about places that you were proud of. You talked about timing, that short-term, in the specifics on that were short-term, short time frames to get things met, to get some of the needs met. In the fiscal arena, you talked about things, buildings, properties that were self-sustaining on some level, supporting tourism, possibly with increasing the TOT income, meeting the local needs, and efficiently. You talked about long-term maintenance plans, and you talked about operational stability. Under balancing needs of community and tourism, you said that was one of your goals or your desires. One was, under that came open space, wanting to make sure that open space was preserved and that you were partnering with local colleges, business, and others to utilize space and to look at some of your space needs and desires. Water security came up as its own. Housing was mentioned as something that was needed. In that, you talked about affordable housing, you talked about city worker housing, and you talked about workforce housing. I'm assuming that what meant workforce was beyond just city workers, the rest of the people that work in St. Helena. Another item that you put under what you wanted to enhance or preserve was supporting pedestrian and bicycle transportation. You said the future of St. Helena, another item. Who are we designing these properties and these recommendations for. There was some discussion about realistic demographics. So, for example, there seems to be a decrease in school-age children. So some of your schools in town are closing. What does that mean to you? A need to upgrade the infrastructure so that St. Helena doesn't fall apart in its future. You don't want to sell your soul. And you were specific about no big box stores, or at least some of you were. But that all came under the future of St. Helena. And then the values. So the mission or vision statement that we looked at, some of which was not covered under the rest of these, and that's that you want to pay attention to the infrastructure of the city, cultural and recreational needs. You want to embrace your historic small town character. You want to make sure that you're family friendly, and you want to make sure that you're paying attention to local business. These are the positive attributes of St. Helena. Is there anything, so this is the first question that we offer to you, is there anything that you need to add to this?
Are these recapped on the handout?
Yes, they're in the handout, they're just not in the, yeah. I put them together because some were repeated.
I guess I'm confused. I would think a couple of these things maybe even could be combined again. Like over here we have gathering places, multiple uses, different things, local tourists, but then over here we have balance needs of community and tourism with open space and park. I mean, I don't know. Open space seems to me to go with, multiple use, there was a whole all right. It just seems like some of these things could even further be combined, because I'm just looking at, places to gather, reasons to gather, helping the tourist community have places to gather, and then we had open space, and now they're separate things. I don't know. Because I combined a whole lot of things into fewer items. So I don't know if anybody has that or similar comment.
I had another comment. I wanted to add lack of ethnic diversity, also economic. I don't know another way to say it other than not losing artists or people in the middle. That I think is happening in St. Helena. A lot of people that can't afford here, even recently in the last 3 years, are leaving.
So people can't afford to live here anymore. So I didn't go over those yet. In terms of what you want to avoid or mitigate, and then the pressing needs. I wanted to make sure that there was, if there was something else that needed to be added there, or, again, if you wanted to move some of those things around. I think the difference in terms of gathering places and having a number of different uses, types of use, was the gathering places. The balancing the needs of the community and tourism seemed to say that we wanted to make sure that we were really paying attention to what you do, what you recommend. How's that going to impact the Main Street business community? How's it going to impact folks that maybe don't officially use Signorelli Barn, but really that's a place where they go and meditate? And so that's a local use. A tourist probably wouldn't be doing that. But so that it seemed like it was different. One was sort of almost a concrete gathering place piece, and the other one was, are we balancing the needs of people that come here and the people that live here in general? Is anything missing from that list at this point that any of you had or thought about? So let me go through.
I'm sorry, Gene, just a general question. As I look at some of these, I just wonder if we need to think about which ones of these or which subset of these overlap with the facilities exercise, because as I look at some of the items, they seem to be maybe outside of or somehow independent of what some of the shape parameters are that we're working on.
So let me just tell you what the next step is.
Too complex.
Let me tell you what the next step is, because this was the big picture. So you've just been given dots. You each have 9 of them. My invitation in a minute, after we go through the needs and the mitigation, is for you to say what's the most important for you. Then we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to move into what does success, and the most important for you, Stan, is exactly what's the most important for you as a SHAPE committee member when you're looking at what are we going to do with these buildings or pieces of property.
What are we going to do with the dots?
You're going to vote on...
I mean, once we voted, what are you going to do with the results?
This is now going to become at least part of the framework. So what I'm imagining is that this becomes part of kind of like an Excel sheet where you say, okay, these are the things that were really important to us, and when we're looking at each one of the buildings, these are some of the things that we want to consider as we move forward with our plans.
I'm just wondering, using the dots up, for example, I would probably put a lot of dots on parking, but I'm not sure parking comes within the scope of some of the facilities decisions we're looking at, or dirty air. I'm not sure how that overlays with our scope.
I was going to sell you my dots for parking.
I could use some proxy dots.
I'd like to see, under balance the needs of community and tourism, I'd like to see something where there's a dual purpose or an attractant to both get people activated in the community and a reason for people to come to our community. So whether Doug had talked about festivals or some of the things that we have here that are hosted at the Cameo or at the Native Sons Hall, or maybe it's Lyman Park, or maybe it's using some of our assets to be better utilized. And I think it's important that we preserve our character, but also recognize that we need to offer things to people to bring them here to visit and spend their money.
I, for one, don't feel compelled to put dots on the wall. I think that's just an excellent list right there. And I don't see anything that I would say should fall off the list. And therefore, I think the list is as adequate as it stands.
I think it seems like we've got a step before putting any dots, because frankly, I don't know how I would put dots up there. I mean, I could pick any 2 up here. Traffic and housing. Well, they're both important. It depends on how much of one I'm giving up for the other as to whether or not. I could come up with a scenario where we're going to create one new 300-square-foot apartment, and we're going to have gridlock 24 hours a day from Yountville to Calistoga. I care more about traffic in that one. Or I've got another one where I'm going to provide a whole swath of housing for all different income types, and it's going to increase 2 cars more a day are going to go through town. Without any quantitative trade-off to be made there, I can't tell you which one of those is more important. They're all important until I see what sorts of impacts our different alternatives have. Then I can tell you if I care more about one or the other. But this seems very hard to do for me without any sort of metric associated with these, or how much of one I'm comparing to another one. And some of them are not even individual criteria. I mean, some of them are already trade-offs. You've got, where did I see it? The combo of functionality and aesthetics. That one's a trade-off already. Is it a functionality or is it aesthetics? Well, it seems like we've got to cull this down, find the ones that are actually saying the same thing, combine those into common things, make a smaller list before we start deciding which ones are more important. I'd rather put the dots up on ones that clearly aren't even relevant to what we're doing here. Maybe we could put dots up there and throw some of them out right now rather than picking which ones belong.
Just a note on the combo of functionality and aesthetics, that's meant to say if we do something functional, let's have an aesthetic treatment to it.
Right,
For
it's two
example,
different things.
Well, the Napa Valley, the downtown Napa garage, for example, doesn't really look like a garage because it was done aesthetically, but it serves the function. It's very artistically done. That's what I was trying to get at.
I'm finding myself a little bit confused. We have 12 buildings that we know are in disrepair, and we need to figure out what to do with them, and the only real open space that's involved with this is the parcel on the library property that's its own thing, and that's not really entirely part of our mandate, but it needs to be only because that will infuse itself into all the other decisions we make. Other than that, what does water security have to do with what we're supposed to be doing here? What does parking really have to do with this, except that when we're talking about what we would suggest we do with these buildings to make them affordable and fully used, parking may become part of it, but it doesn't seem like this is something that we need to have as our first thought. It feels like we're all over the place with this, that we're sort of talking about things that are very generically, where are we looking at the future, and that's not our mandate here. So I'm wondering if we could maybe go back to I can't remember if this was structured or unstructured, but the other one where people actually suggest some ideas, and then we talk about the ideas and see how they fit within.
The semi-unstructured structure?
Yeah, I can't remember which was which.
Based on what I thought our homework was, I went through and sort of dug through and reviewed them, and as I was reviewing them, a number of them sort of got grouped in my mind, and so I thought where we were coming is we were going to have a discussion as to what we each sort of thought our top 3 to 5 were in these 3 different areas versus having, putting the dots up there. And I would, for one, suggest that we have the list. We've all now been able to look at the list, or maybe some of us haven't, but to really give the list maybe more thought even, and at the next meeting, come and each of us sort of discuss. I put together what I thought my top, 3 to 5 were, and what my thoughts were behind those, and why I thought it was important for, St. Helena. Not just, I want, clean air. It was like, well, why is that important? And so I think having each of us sort of throwing those out there and having this sort of more of a roundtable discussion about it then may get us, and I think you were saying it, Tim, to coalesce around, not 40 ideas, or even 12 or 13 ideas, but down to those 3 or 4 primary ideas in each of the areas. Because I do think there is some combination of, they kind of go together even more so than what's up there.
My impression is that most everybody has a pretty good idea about what they see for a large number of these buildings and what ought to be done with them. I think some people have a bigger idea that how they're all going to work together, and some have just a 1 or 2. But I'd love to hear what people are thinking about.
Well, I do get the idea.
As opposed to generalities.
Conceptually, I understand asking what's important to us for St. Helena, and what's, what are the issues? Because then you're going to use those criteria, I think, to then to decide or suggest why you think something should happen to a building. So versus just leaping into why something should happen to a building, I do believe we want to have some criteria for that. And I just think maybe the next meeting we could start it out by having this sort of discussion of what everybody went through versus, because I can't just put some dots up on the wall and then tell you why these 5 things were important to me, because I'm not getting an opportunity to do that right now. And I don't even know that I can put the dots up there kind of how I have my 5 important things here, which I have certain meaning behind each of those 5 things.
Well, one of the things we talked about when we were discussing the unstructured or the structured approach that came up as a third option was, would it be helpful, and I think talking to Doug's point, would it be helpful for the group to throw out a straw man or some straw men about what we think at this point with all that we've learned and all the information that's flowed through, maybe taking some of these factors or criteria into consideration. But it'd be interesting to find out, or would it be worth trying to find out if some of us have some ideas about what could be done to facilities or what the facilities landscape might look like, and we might find that there's maybe more coalescing than we realize. We're sort of starting at a very exploded kind of approach here and to see how it's going to coalesce, but I just wonder if it would be an interesting exercise to see if some of the group have more specific ideas or some preliminary recommendations, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
I hear that, and I've heard that once before. I guess I do believe it's important to have some criteria out there so that you can keep going back and saying, okay, well, how does that fit with the criteria that we're all discussing?
Yeah.
Versus, again, having 11 ideas as to what we do with each building and not being able to have something to go back that says, well, this is why that fits, because it fits with, the 3 or 5 things that we all kind of got to, or majority got to, that said this is what's important to St. Helena. Without that, I think we're just...
I would hope that in the presentations that anybody would make about what their ideas are, they'd take that into account and say, this is why I think this building could work for this. This is how it would be paid for. This is why it would be good for the community. This would be why all of these different things, that would be part of your idea, one would hope.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm thinking is if the criteria get at least distilled down to the 3 or 5 within the areas, then I think that may evoke some more thought to what people think we ought to do with the buildings or the spaces we have.
And I think Mark's right, and I think when people ask us, or the city council asks us, when we make a report to them, why did you make that decision? You say, because our criteria, our values in the city are whatever, and that value goes with preserving that building, or maybe that value goes with not selling any of the buildings.
Right.
But I do think we have to have, we do have to have some values or criteria and go from there.
I think we're on the precipice of doing that. I mean, I don't see anything missing up there. The way this is often done is you group them into common groups, and we have, I think, Doug, you expressed a little frustration that we're kind of getting away from our main focus here is to talk about facilities and services, and the rest of these things are important, but that's sort of the focus, and that's a category all by itself. How are you going to measure your success in what we do to all of these facilities and the provision of services here? So we could have, to me, that's a clear category. It is not a single criterion by itself. We've got to have a discussion about how do you measure that. There's, what sort of quality of service do you end up providing with that alternative, or what is the quality of the building? How much did it cost, and when is it going to happen? I mean, it's sort of a project management way to look at these, because these are essentially going to be projects of some sort, and you can think about the 3 pillars of project management as a way to think about criteria. So we've got a discussion about structuring that piece. That one's critically important, but you could come up with other categories. There's been a ton of discussion about the character of the town, and some of what we're going to do is going to have character impacts. And so we might have another category, and then we can have a discussion which of those character attributes are the important ones. Can we come up with proxies that maybe combine a few of them together? Because we've got to get down to a manageable list. We can't do 40 of these. We might be able to handle 15, but we've got to cull it down. So I would propose maybe spending a little bit of time to try to structure them into common groups, or group them into common groups. Then we can have a discussion about, okay, which of these are the key ones in this, the